Hello everyone, and welcome to our show today, this presentation by INE on a CCNA Kickoff. Like I like to do before all my shows, I just want to do a quick check just to make sure that the audio and video is working fine for everybody out there. So we've got this going out via multiple methods. So if someone could just type something into the live question feed or type in a comment just to verify for me that you can see and hear everything, that'll give me the warm fuzzies. I don't have to troubleshoot anything like that. So how are we looking? Everybody all right? Okay, well, I'm getting some feedback that everything looks good, everything's a go, so great. We'll go ahead and just start up then. Okay, good. So let me go through the introductory slides real quick just so I can keep myself on track and not miss any of the relevant points. So first of all, if you've never seen me before or seen any of my videos or taken a class from me, let me just do a quick introduction of myself. There I am. That's my name, Keith Bogart. That's what I looked like yesterday. This morning I woke up and I had all this stuff all over my face. I'm not sure what happened there, but I guess that's what happens once you pass your CCNA. Just wake up with a bunch of white hair. But there's my contact information as well. So if you ever need to reach out to me as you're studying your CCNA with, technical questions or, questions that you had after watching this video and you didn't have a chance to get them answered, got a variety of ways there to get your questions answered. Now, I want to pause at this moment and sort of dive into something else which will also help you with your CCNA. Like I mentioned, you can reach out to me one-on-one via email or Twitter or LinkedIn or something like that. However, like any other instructors, there's times when I'm teaching, times when I'm recording, and so to get probably the quickest response and also make sure that your questions can benefit others beyond yourself, I'd recommend that you do this. So if you don't already have an INE account, it's free. And you can just go to, just create your free members account. Just go to INE.com and you can sign up for that. And then once you do that, go to members.ine.com. I'm going to go ahead and expand this to make it a little bit bigger for you. And, this is what you see once you create your free account. It's a calendar of our upcoming courses and stuff. But what I really want to focus in on is here in the upper right corner where it says Connect. If you click on that, you'll see IEOC. This stands for the INE Online Community. So if you have questions while you're pursuing your CCNA, CCNP, whatever, I'd recommend this is the first place you go to. Go ahead and click on that. And that'll take you right here. And then from here, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see under Cisco, we have the Cisco CCNA Forum. And there's tons of people, hundreds if not thousands of people that look at that forum. I would suggest that you put your question on there. It could be a technical question or just a sort of a procedural question. And guaranteed within like an hour or two at the most, you'll start getting some answers to your question. And that way, not only do you benefit, but other people who look at this forum also benefit from your question. Now, I also monitor that. So in the very rare situation where like a day or two goes by and there's no answers to a question, it's been a long time since I've seen that happen, I'll jump in there and I'll answer it. So that's my preferred method that you use to get your questions answered. But here's my contact information just in case. So let's talk a little bit about the objective of this session today. So I've got sort of three main things I want to try to impart to you. Number one, to describe the testing experience for the CCNA. So when you walk into it, you're not just completely blind wondering, what am I getting myself into? I want to sort of be able to paint a picture in your head as far as what it's going to be like for you when you walk into that building where you're going to be tested. I also want to help you identify some common pitfalls. This is going to be the last thing we talk about. What are some things that people sort of run into that might just totally derail their studying efforts? And how can we avoid those types of things? And also, the bulk of this will be to help you through the studying process. I'm going to answer a whole bunch of questions like, how do I know what topics I should study? How do I know what level of depth or detail I should study for those topics? Where do I find information about those topics so I can start studying them? What are some studying tips that will make the most efficient use of my time? So we're going to go through all that good stuff. Now, as far as prerequisite knowledge is concerned, nothing. The fact that you're watching me on your tablet or laptop or computer pretty much tells me you've got all the prerequisite knowledge you need. So this session's really geared towards someone who's thinking, you know what? I've heard this thing about the CCNA, this certification called the CCNA, and I'm thinking of pursuing it. I think I want to start studying for it. What can I expect? And how can I make the most efficient use of my studying time? If that describes you, that's what this session is all about. Now, if you've already started studying, great. I'm sure you'll get some stuff out of this as well. But there really is no prerequisite knowledge other than the fact that, you can look at your laptop and listen and see me at the moment. And as far as Q&A is concerned, I don't have any predefined time for Q&A. As I go through here, I am going to be looking for your questions online as they come in, and I'll do my best to answer your questions as they come in. Now, we have quite a few people watching today, so I don't know if I'm going to get to everyone's question. If I just start getting inundated with that kind of stuff, I'll just try to pick the ones that I think will have the most benefit to everybody else. And if for some reason I don't get to your question, hey, you got my contact information that you saw there just a moment ago. So you can always reach out to me or put on the INE online community. So with that, let me just quickly go and catch up and make sure there aren't any questions that need answering right now. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, I don't see any questions in that one format there. Okay, I think we're good to go. No immediate questions that need answering. Fantastic. Okay, so the first thing I want to start with is the testing experience. So to back off with that, in order to talk about the testing experience, we first have to talk about what test are you going to sign up for, because that's actually part of the process, is identifying which exam you want to take and then going online and scheduling a date and time to do that. So, in case you're not familiar with this, if you want to pass your CCNA for routing and switching, and there are other CCNAs, but that's what most people start with, is the routing and switching CCNA, you have a couple of options. There are two individual tests you can take. One's called the ICND-1, the other is called the ICND-2, or if you just prefer to knock it all out at once, you can take what's called the composite exam, which pulls questions from both question pools into one single exam. So let's talk a little bit about that here. So how do you find out information about those? Well, so for that, I would start by going to our good friend Google and just typing in Cisco CCNA. And the second link down here, when I did it, is going to take us directly to what we want to see. So this is where I would start your process about learning about the exam and what's on it and how to prepare yourself. So you can see here, if I scroll down, let me make that a little bit bigger for you. So here's the two individual exams. So when you sign up for them, you're going to need to know these numbers, 100-105 and 200-105. Or if you want to take what's called the composite exam, or otherwise known as the CCNA Accelerated, it's the 200-125. Now, a lot of times I get questions from people, Keith, what's the best approach? To take the composite exam or to take the two separate exams? That's really entirely up to you. The way I look at it is that if you're brand new to the networking world, you've never studied networking before, maybe you're a lawyer moving into the networking world, or maybe, you work in the kitchen or something like that, but all this stuff is brand new to you. Probably don't want to take the composite exam. You will most likely, in that case, want to start with the ICND-1, work your way through that. It'll take you a few months to prepare for that. There's a lot of stuff to memorize. And then once you pass your ICND-1, take a few more months and pass your ICND-2. The composite exam, in my opinion, is really best designed for those folks who have already been working with computer networking to some extent. You already have some baseline knowledge of routing and switching and IP addresses. Maybe not a lot, but you've been doing it at least a little bit. You've got some foundation to work upon. It's not all new to you. In that case, you could probably do the accelerated. But if you ever actually buy the books for these, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, if you actually purchase the hard copy books, they are really thick. I mean, each book is well over 500 pages. So the two books together for the accelerated test would be like 1,000 pages at least. So that's a lot of material for someone who's brand new to this to memorize all at once, to go in and take a single test. So that's sort of how I would qualify that. All right, so that's step number one, is to identify which procedure you want to take. Step number two. Okay, so what should you expect when you walk into the testing center? Okay, first of all, let me talk a little bit about how do I schedule this exam. Let's go back to where we just were. So let's say I want to take the ICND 1. I would go ahead and click on that here, and we'll come back to this several times. But right here, register at Pearson VUE. So Pearson VUE is Cisco's authorized testing center. This is all a computer-based test. So when you take it, you're going to go somewhere to this Pearson VUE location. They have thousands of these locations all around the world. And you're going to log in. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And they're going to sit you down in front of a computer. And the whole thing is going to be computer-based. Just you, the keyboard, and the monitor, and that's it. So that's why you have to register at Pearson VUE. They're the ones who oversee this exam. So I would just click on that. And site closures. Well, hopefully they don't have a closure right now as we're going through this, but you would just, register for Pearson VUE. Once again, you don't need a credit card or anything to do that. It's free. And then I would do, well, let me go ahead and sign in here. This probably doesn't have my credentials because I'm using this on a new laptop. Okay, well, I don't remember what my username and password are, but just to bypass that, once you sign in, the first thing you'll do is you would select proctored exams. Proctored exam means it's not an exam you do at home on your own time. It's an exam where you go in somewhere and they're watching you with cameras in the ceiling. That's what they mean by a proctored exam. Then you would locate that exam number. You just type in, like 200-125 or whatever the number is, and you'll find that. Click on that. Next thing is, it'll ask you, do you want to take this? And I think you've got two choices, Japanese and English. I think those are the two choices presently. So whichever one you're fluent with. And then you'll go to a page where it'll say, okay, select a location near you. And you can type in your address, and it'll show you locations are close to you. Select location, and then it'll show you a calendar of available times and dates. And for this particular test, they'll give you 90 minutes. Okay, so it's an hour and a half that you're given to complete this test. So they'll show you available time slots, available dates. You'll select one. At that point, you'll have to type in your credit card to actually pay them for this test. Once you've paid it, you'll get an email confirming it, and you're good to go. Now you're all signed up. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about what the testing experience is when you walk into the center. So you're going to walk in on the day of the exam, and you don't have to get there like 30 minutes ahead of time. Just get there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the exam starts. They've got a PC waiting for you, reserved for you. So you'll go in there, you'll sign in, and they'll need to see two forms of identification, like a credit card with your name on it and your driver's license or something like that. After you've signed in, then you're going to have to basically give them everything you have except for the clothes on your back. Your watch, I've even got this little analog watch here. They forced me to give that up and give it to them. I'm not sure how I could cheat with this thing, but they want me to give it to them. Your smartphone, tablet, keys, they want to take everything away from you that you could possibly use to cheat. So once you give that to them, they're going to lock it up. Now in some testing centers I've gone to, they actually have a locker, like in a locker room, and you get the key to the lock, which makes me feel kind of secure. Other testing centers, they just had a drawer, a locked drawer. They unlocked the drawer, they opened it up, and they had a little cubby within that drawer where they put all my stuff, and then they closed it and locked it up again. I don't like that so much because now my wallet and everything else is out of my control, but that's just what they do. So just have to trust they're not going to rifle through that stuff. Then what they're going to do, now that all your valuables are gone, is they're going to give you like an 11 by 17 piece of laminated paper. It's like a laminated board. And they're going to give you 1 or 2 dry erase markers, some earplugs, and an eraser. And that's all you get. So bullet point number 1, No calculators, nothing like that allowed into the CCNA exam. So as you start practicing these concepts like subnetting and dotted decimal and things like that, don't be under the false impression of, oh, well, I don't have to memorize this because I'll just have access to a calculator. No, you won't. There's no calculators either on the computer they sit you in front of or that you can take in with you. It's all in your head. So when you go in there, they're going to sit you down in front of a PC, and the testing administrator is going to log you in, select the correct test, and they're going to walk away. And they're going to close the door, and now you're in there. Now, when I've done it, it's typically a room that's got several cubes, and there's other people around you. So I frequently make use of the earplugs that they give me, because hearing other people's typing, other people's screams of anguish are kind of distracting to me when I'm taking the test. So I like it to be nice and quiet, and so they don't hear my screams of anguish when I'm failing something. So then what's going to happen is when you press the start button, it's going to give you an option to go through a tutorial. And I'm actually going to show you the exact same tutorial that you can see here online, so you can just skip that if you want to. So the actual 90 minutes does not happen until you press the start button. Once you're ready and you press go, then the 90 minutes starts counting down and you have all that time to complete the test. So let's talk about that. What is the format of the test questions? By the way, once I get done with this slide, I'll go back and answer any of your unanswered questions. So I won't wait too long. So the format of the test questions, what's great is if you go back to that same Cisco website, not this one, but this one right here. Let me zoom in on this. Right here, you can see whether you pick any of these exams here, it says review the type of exam questions. So let's take a look and see what happens when I click this. So this is going to come up, and then I have to right click and hit play. And this actually shows you what you're going to see when you take the CCNA. So some of the questions are multiple choice, single answer, like that. Some of the questions are multiple choice, multiple answer. And notice on the right here, they actually do tell you how many correct answers there are. They'll say choose 3, choose 2, choose 4. So you don't have to guess about that. You know how many there are, you just don't know which ones are correct. Now I would say that probably 90% of all the questions you get on the test are going to be one of these two types right here. Multiple choice, single answer, or multiple choice, multiple answer. Now, there's a few other options too that you might see. Drag and drop. You're not going to get a lot of these. 1, maybe 2 drag and drop questions, not a whole lot. Fill in the blank. I don't think I've ever gotten a fill in the blank question on the CCNA. So apparently they have that set up in their testing engine, but I don't think I've ever actually seen a fill in the blank question. So that's kind of rare. And then there is the dreaded router simulation. So up at the top there, it sort of gives you a scenario, tells you what your objective is. It gives you a topology here. And so step number 1 is to identify which device you need to log into. So for example, they're showing you click on host D, which is connected to a particular router. And then once you click on that, you now have to get into that router and configure it. So they'll say you need to activate this feature, or you need to fix this thing that's broken. And this is how you're going to do it. So the router simulation, like it says, this is a simulation. You're not actually logging into a real Cisco router or Cisco switch. You're logging into software that's like emulating a Cisco router or Cisco switch. Now, why I say these things are so dreaded is because a single simulation can take up 5, 6, 7 minutes of your time if you don't know what you're doing. So it's a big time hole, these simulations here. So fortunately, when I've taken the CCNA, and I take it fairly frequently just to keep up to date on what's there and sort of like what types of questions are being thrown at me. The last time I took the exam, I only got one of these simulations. In the past, I've had like as many as I think 4 or 5 simulations. So you can expect that, somewhere between like 1 and 5 simulations for the entire set of questions you get. But make sure that you don't sink your time into this. I mean, 90 minutes sounds like a lot, but if you spend 10 minutes on this one question, you're going to pay for it later on. So that is the router simulation. And typically in the router simulation, you're either configuring something from scratch. They'll say like, configure EIGRP or configure an access list. Or you're trying to fix something that's broken. They'll say, okay, this device can't reach this device. Here's the topology. And you got to figure out among all the devices where the problem is, log into that simulated router and type in commands to fix the problem. So that's typically what you'll see in the simulation. Now, what else do we have in here? Then you've got the testlet. I hate these testlets, and here's why. It's kind of cheating on Cisco's part because it's like 4 questions in one. You can see that right here. So you've got something up at the top, like that gives you an objective or maybe some output of a show command. And then you have 4 multiple choice questions based on what you see. And you have to answer one question before you can move on to the next one. And yet this is really, of the 50 or 55 questions total you get, this is just counted as 1, even though really it's like 4 in one. So these also can burn up quite a bit of your time. So beware of those. And once again, testlets, I've gotten anywhere from like 1 to maybe 3 or 4 testlet questions. Like I said, vast majority of the test is multiple choice, but you will see sprinkled throughout there some of these testlets and some of these simulations. And then there's a simlet. So with a simlet, this is testing your ability not to configure something, but more like to troubleshoot something. In other words, do you know how to get into a device and type the correct diagnostic command to obtain the information you're looking for? Like in this case, the multiple choice question is, what is the IP address on a particular interface? Now notice this is also 3 questions in one right here. So this is the first one. So you'd have to know how to log into a device, issue the correct command to answer your question. So you're not configuring anything here, you're not fixing anything here, you're just issuing what I call show commands or diagnostic commands to be able to answer the multiple choice questions here in the simlet. These also, you'll get maybe 1 to maybe 3 of these during the exam. And that's it. That is the type, those are the types of questions that you'll see, the format of the questions as you go through the exam. A couple things that are very important about this. In the CCNA, you cannot go backwards. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's say that you're on question number 5 and you're all, oh man, I totally do not know the answer to this question. I'm just gonna have to guess. C, okay? Then you keep moving on. Now let's say you're on question number 12 and there's something about the way question 12 is worded that kickstarts your memory back to question number 5 and you say, oh, I remember what the answer was to that. It's too late. You've moved on. You cannot go back to question number 5. So once you hit submit for a question, that's it. Now you're on to the next one. So just be aware of that. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about as far as the testing experience is concerned is how well did I do? So like I mentioned, you're going to get anywhere between like 50 and 60 questions that you have to do over the course of that 90 minutes. And if you pass, great, right? But what if you don't pass? What if you don't get a passing score? Well, then naturally you're going to want to know, where did I screw up and where should I focus my studying efforts? They're not going to give you a detailed printout of all the questions and say, here's the question number 7 and you got that wrong. Here's question number 9, you got that wrong. They're not going to do that. Basically what they do is, and I'm going to show you this in the next section, when you look at this thing called the CCNA Blueprint, and I'll show you that, that's like a bulleted list of all the topics you need to study for the CCNA. But they sort of generally categorize that into like 5 or 6 general categories, like routing is one, layer 2 LAN technologies is another, security is another. So when you get done with the test, you're going to get a printout that lists those 5 or 6 general categories and tells you what percentage you did from 0 to 100. So when you walk out of there, it might say routing, you got 95%, but network security, you got 4%. Now, you don't necessarily know which particular questions fell under network security, but you'll probably have a pretty good idea as to why you did so badly under that particular general heading. But that's as specific as it gets when it comes to the score report that you get at the very end. Now, let me go back real quickly here and see if there are any questions that need some answering. There's been several that have come in here. Let's see. Yes, you definitely need to know about the OSI model. That's one of those drag and drop things I'd like to test you on, is your knowledge of the OSI model and what the layers do and what order they're in and their names. And yeah, as far as the quantity of questions, their actual website says you're going to get between 50 and 60 questions. Sometimes you'll get a little bit more. The last time I took it, I got like 64 questions. It looks like Ismail also got 64 questions, so it's going to be roughly between 50 and 60, but you might get slightly more than that. Also, one other thing to know is that when you log into the sys, or when they log you in, you start it up, you'll see a little disclaimer at the front of the test that says that sprinkled throughout the test are questions that don't count towards your grade. Now, you're not going to know which questions they are, but Cisco is putting those in there, and if you get them right or you get them wrong, it doesn't matter because it doesn't count towards your grade. Now, like I said, you don't know which questions those are. My theory is that these are probably questions that they're thinking, hey, the next time we come up with a CCNA revision, maybe we should put this new question in there, but we're not quite sure if we've written the question clearly. We're not really sure if this is a question that a lot of people already know. So they put those into the test just to get some feedback for the developers of the CCNA to see how the question sort of pans out with people. But that might be part of the reason why sometimes you'll get more than 60 questions, because I suspect several of those were like those experimental questions that didn't count towards your score. How long will the session last? So I assume you're talking about today's session. I don't know. Depends on how many questions we get. In the past, this has taken about an hour and a half, but there's a lot more questions today than the past. So we'll just see how we're doing. And I'll talk in a minute about, passing scores and all that good stuff. Let's see here. What other questions, real quick? Yeah, you don't get negative points. So if you get something wrong, it's not like it takes 5 points away from your score. You just don't get points for that. Also, there have been a lot of questions about, okay, is there partial credit? Like on, for example, a simulation. How many points is that simulation worth? 1 point, 5 points, 10 points? If I get some of the commands correct, but I forget some of the others, do I get partial credit? The short answer is nobody knows. Even at Cisco, and I worked at Cisco for about 17 years under the umbrella organization that designed these tests. Even within Cisco, the Cisco employees themselves have no idea how the grading works in these exams, from the CCNA all the way up to the CCIE. Only the people in those super secret departments who actually design and implement the tests know how they're grading things. So if you ever hear of anybody who says, oh yeah, you get partial credit, I would ask them, and just how do you know that? Because the only way they could possibly know that is if they knew somebody who actually designed the test and they were told about that. I don't know anybody like that. Maybe you do, but I've never been able to find out the answer to that. Cisco keeps that very tight to the vest, so there's no way to really know. Let's see here. Just see if there's any other quick questions here. See, there's a bunch of people asking technical questions like, how do I make this work, and blah, blah, blah. You guys can chat amongst yourselves about that, but I'm not going to use this presentation as an opportunity to talk tech like that. All right, I think we're all right. And somebody's also asking, they're saying, I have found that the questions are worded in ways that confuse. How do we prepare for that? Good question. Yes. Unfortunately, I don't think they intentionally, I really don't think they're malicious. They're not maliciously trying to confuse you. But I believe the people at Cisco who write these questions, they don't have English majors. And in some cases, English might not even be their primary language. And as a consequence, some of the questions, yes, they are poorly worded. It might say select one answer, and you might look at the answer and you might say, well, technically both A and C are correct. That's going to happen. and unfortunately there's no way to avoid that. That's why getting a perfect score is almost impossible. This is what I recommend. Part of getting ready for the CCNA experience and any Cisco written experience like CCIE, CCNP, or CCNA is getting familiar with how are they going to ask the questions, like what type of wording and verbiage do they use. For that reason, I would strongly recommend looking at Cisco's official certification guidebooks and other books put out by Cisco Press. A lot of those books have like beginning of chapter quizzes and tests, and those tests are actually written by the folks at Cisco. So once you get familiar with how they word those questions in the books, and Cisco also has some online practice exams, once you get familiar with that, you'll start to sort of see some patterns in how they ask questions. But it's almost inevitable that when you take some of these written exams, there's going to be some questions you're all like, man, this question stinks. There's like 3 possible correct answers and they want 1. Now in each question, there is an opportunity to put comments, but honestly, you're going to be under a time crunch here. I don't know if you're really going to want to take your time to type in a comment of this question stunk. You're going to want to keep moving forward. So hopefully that won't happen very often. Let's see here. And I already answered the questions. They're not actual virtualized routers. They are still simulated routers. It's still their old simulation. They're still their old software engine. Okay. All right, great. Then let's keep going. Okay, so the next topic. How do I discover what topics are on the test? How do I prepare for this huge world of networking? How do I know what I can be expected to be tested on? Well, there's really 2 ways you can answer that question. Number 1 is the Cisco CCNA Blueprints, and the other is the official Cisco Press books. Let's start with the Blueprints. You definitely want to familiarize yourself with these. So if I go back to where we were before, so once again, I got here just by going to Google and typing Cisco CCNA, and in this particular case, I've selected the ICND1 test, the 100-105. I'll just go back one. So it was from this main page right here, the main CCNA page, and I just selected ICND1. Okay. Now, on all these tests, somewhere on the page, you'll see it says review the exam topics. Right there, review the exam topics. So you'll want to click on that, and that will take you to what we call the blueprint for the exam. So for the ICND1, you can see there's 5 main categories, from network fundamentals all the way down to infrastructure maintenance. And if you just open up some of these, for example, let's do network fundamentals, you will see a bulleted list of what's under that category. Anything within this list is fair game for you to be tested upon. Anything in there. So you're going to want to print out these blueprints and all the details here and base your studying on that. So that's the first part of the question, is what topics are going to be on there. Now also, some other things I've noticed is that frequently I've seen that the official books that Cisco puts out, and they put out sort of 2 different kinds of books. They have official certification guides and foundation learning guides. The foundation learning guides typically go into a little bit more detail than the official certification guides do. But both of them, one thing I've seen that's common is that a lot of times when I'm looking at those books, they will have topics in there that are not part of this list, which leads me to my next important thing. Just because you see something on the list doesn't mean that that is all inclusive of what's going to be on the test. Sometimes they will throw you a question that is not on this list. I don't like that. I don't think it's right, but it happens. And anybody, if you talk to anybody who's taken a CCNA on up, they'll tell you the exact same thing. Hey, you might get thrown a question that you didn't prepare for because it wasn't on the list. Hopefully that won't happen to you, or if it does, it's very minimal. But I would definitely compare this list with the books. If something is in the Foundation Learning Guide or in the official certification guide book, to me, that is a good candidate for being on the test. So even if there's a paragraph or a topic in there that's not on this list, you should know it. All right? So that's the blueprint. So let's talk about those books for a second. I personally love Safari online books. This is a subscription-based service online. I don't know how much it costs. You can get it like per month or per year. But if you subscribe to this, you've got access to literally thousands of books that you can read online. So this will say, I mean, just a single CCNA book could easily cost you 25 or 30 bucks right there, just for that one book. And here you've got access to thousands of them. And not just Cisco books. There's all kinds of books, whether you're a software developer or into marketing or whatever. So let's say you're on here and you type in, okay, you say, okay, I want to take the Cisco 200-105 exam. And I want to look for something that's official. So I type in the word official there. And here you can see. So for example, here's the official cert guide, academic edition. Let's go ahead and click on that. And then we view the table of contents, and here's the entire book online. And also what's nice about this is you can see here with each particular chapter, for example, spanning tree, if I just click on that. Different books do this different ways. I think the academic edition is a little bit different. The regular Cisco official certification guidebooks, typically their format is before a chapter begins, they'll have like a 15 or 20 question, do I already know this quiz in there. And you can take that, and then at the appendix of the book, you can see if you got your answers right. I think in the academic edition, it looks like they have questions at the end of the chapter. But either way, this is Cisco official stuff. This was written and blessed by Cisco people, or people who work very closely with the Cisco people. So the questions that you see in here should be of adequate depth and written in the same style as what you're going to see on the exam. Now, another good thing about these books is a frequent question that I would have if I was studying for an exam is, okay, so it says I need to know spanning tree protocol. That's a bullet point. Spanning tree protocol is huge. You know, how much depth do I need to know about this particular topic? That's where I refer people back to these books. Whatever level of depth they go into here in the book, that is how much depth you should study for your exam. For example, spanning tree, you can get all the way up to CCIE level depth on that. But if you were just to Google spanning tree and just start studying on your own, you might end up studying a whole bunch of stuff that's not even relevant to the CCNA because you're studying at a much higher level. So that's why I definitely recommend looking at these books here to get the level of detail. Now, Cisco isn't the only one, clearly, who has written books on the CCNA. There's a lot of different authors out there that have written CCNA stuff. That's why when I went to the home page here, I just typed in the word official because I wanted to see the Cisco official stuff. But there's other stuff. For example, if I just do 200-105 Cisco and leave out the word official, you'll see there's all kinds of stuff in here. Kevin Wallace has something here. He works very closely with Cisco. So you'll see that Wendell Odom and Kevin Wallace are the two primary authors when it comes to CCNA stuff, but there's lots of other stuff in here as well, which leads people to sometimes ask me another question. Which book is the best? Well, that's a very subjective question. I definitely recommend checking out the official Cisco Press books for the reasons I've already stated, but you know, different authors write in different styles. And the analogies and graphics and style that one author uses might appeal to you more than another author, which begs the question, how do I find an author that speaks to me, that can really help me learn? And for this, I like to refer people to Amazon. For example, if I type in Cisco CCNA in books, a lot of these books here, when you click on them, let's just do this first one here, Official Certification Guide Library. What you're looking for, what I want to point out, and you've probably noticed this already in the past, is this look inside feature. I love this thing of Amazon because what that means, if I can click on a book without actually buying it, and there will be several pages, sometimes dozens of pages, that I can scroll through in this book just to see what it's like. For example, let me scroll down here. All right, here's a section he's talking about, looks like the OSI model. So I can just spend a few minutes reading through this page and get a feel for this author. You know, do I like the way this person writes? Do I like the tables? Do I like the graphics? Is it clear? Does it make sense to me? And just go through, several books with this look inside feature. And without even buying it, you'll be able to see, oh, this guy's terrible. He's got a lot of spelling errors. I don't know where he got his information. But this guy over here, love it. Love that book. So that's the way I recommend to people to pick a book that speaks to them. But I would say these are supplemental to the Cisco official certification guides and the foundation learning guides. The Cisco Press official stuff, that's where I would bank on, these are the topics I need to know. This is the level of depth I need to know. Other books that are not official Cisco Press books, well, I would say they're good for supplementing that. Good for maybe shedding some light and waking you up to concepts that weren't quite clear in the official books, but I wouldn't rely on them to answer those questions. What topics do I need to know? How much depth do I need to go? I would not necessarily rely on those non-Cisco books for that. All right, let me pause for a moment and see if there are any other questions that I should answer. So someone here online is mentioning something which is a good point. If you purchase these books at actually Amazon, you purchase it, or you go to Barnes & Noble or something, you purchase it, one of the benefits of purchasing it versus doing it online versus Safari is a lot of these books come with CDs or DVDs in the back that have like simulators that you can practice this stuff. So that's one of the benefits of getting the hard copy book, is you get access to that CD. But I'll show you in a little bit here some other ways you can practice stuff without that, so I will talk about that. Someone's also asking, as far as the simulation questions go, those simulations or those testlet questions, can you use abbreviated commands? As you become more familiar with the Cisco iOS command line, and once you start jumping onto Cisco devices, that's the software that this test is going to want you to know. It's called Cisco IOS. It's like, how there's Windows for your laptop. Well, iOS is a software they put on most of their routers and switches. And Cisco IOS is not graphical based like Windows is. It's actually something you have to memorize a bunch of commands and type in the commands to get the device to do what you want it to do. So as you become more and more proficient with Cisco IOS, you start to learn very soon that a lot of iOS commands, which might be this long in totality, you can type them in abbreviated format. For example, the word show, you can just type in just SH. You don't have to type in the OW, right? There's a lot of commands like that. There's other helpful features where, for example, you can type in part of a command, hit the tab key on your keyboard, and it automatically fills in the rest of the command for you. There's a lot of circumstances where if you don't know a command, you can just hit the question mark on your keyboard, and it'll show you all the available commands at that level where you happen to be at. So a common question is, hey, is all of that stuff going to be available to me on the simulation? My experience has been yes, that when I've taken the simulations, the tab key does work, typing in shortened or abbreviated commands was recognized, and the question mark was also recognized. Now, because this is a emulated software, right? When you're actually doing the exam, you're not on a real router with real Cisco iOS software. You're not going to see all the exact same stuff you would see if you're actually on a router. For example, if you're on a real router and you hit the question mark, you might see like 50 or 60 or 80 commands available at that level. Whereas if you're at that exact same level in the simulation and you do the question mark, you might only see like 10 possible options. Just enough for the test developers to see, do you know what you're looking for? Because these other 9 are distractors. Okay. Let's see. see if there's any other questions here. Yeah, I will talk about packet tracer. I see some comments about that. Someone's also asking about ICND1 and ICND2. Does that mean that one is primarily on switching and the other is primarily on routing? No, that's not the way it works. So the ICND1 and the ICND2 both have switching and routing in them. The ICND1 sort of introduces you to the topic of routing. What is routing? And it takes it from a very low-level approach, like what's a static route? And it introduces you to, I think, EIGRP, but introduces you to that. In the ICND2, there's just more routing, more advanced topics, more advanced features that you have to know. Same thing with switching. ICND1 introduces you to the concept of switching. ICND2 takes it up another notch and gets it more complex. Also in the ICND2, there's some topics that are in there that are not in the ICND1 at all, right? More complex topics that they reserve just for ICND2. The cost of the exams is exactly the same. If you take the ICND1 and the ICND2 separately, they both cost the exact same amount. So you'll save yourself a little bit of money, not a lot, by taking the composite exam. I think it's like $30 or $40 less maybe than the two tests separately. But definitely if you're going to take the two tests separately, do the ICND1 first, followed by the ICND2. Now somebody mentioned a comment in here that technically is incorrect. Someone said you do not become a CCIE without CCNA. Actually, that's not really true. Vast majority of people, yes, to reach their CCIE level, they take a logical progression of steps. They start with the CCNA, then they go to the CCNP, and then they do the CCIE. But technically speaking, the CCIE exam has no prerequisites. Believe it or not, you can go straight for the CCIE written exam without having ever taken another Cisco exam prior to that. And if you pass your CCIE written, then you can take the CCIE lab. That's actually what I did, believe it or not. Now, my story is kind of weird and sort of backwards, but long ago, back in 1999, I didn't have any Cisco certs, and I went right for the CCIE written, and I did the lab, and I got my CCIE first. And then, you know, a couple of years later, I went back and got my CCNA. That's a whole long story. I'm not going to go into it here. But the CCIE does not have any prerequisites. So for those of you who want to go for that approach, go for it. Somebody asked here, if you fail an exam, how long until you can retake it again? And I think I saw another answer to this later on. It's about a week or 2 weeks, and then you can go back and take it again if you fail it. Somebody also asks, do you think it's better to focus on domains rather than going cover to cover on the two books? And if I'm interpreting your question correctly, I think what you're asking is, you know, if I go through the first book, it's going to cover a topic like the OSI model, then it's going to cover, you know, like 6 topics of LAN switching, then it's going to go into 7 topics of routing, and then another 5 topics, and it's going to be done. And then I'm going to move on to the next book. And I think this person's asking, is it better to just like focus on LAN switching first? You know, read all the stuff about LAN switching in ICND1 and then just spend a lot of time really getting that down well before moving on to the next topic of routing. I would recommend that. That's my personal approach, is to focus on a particular large domain like EIGRP routing or LAN switching. Read that, study it, make a lot of flashcards for myself, do a lot of labs on that particular topic until I feel really comfortable with that particular topic before moving on to another one. I would definitely recommend that. All right, so let's see here. And I just want to look at our other interface here to see. All right, so here's a good question. Would you alter the way you study for the CCNA if you're going to go for the CCNP directly afterwards, and you're doing it within a compressed period of time? For example, would you study a topic like OSPF end-to-end instead of reading the CCNA books and then the CCNP books after you pass the CCNA? Oh, that's a good question. Once again, I think that really depends on what foundational level of knowledge you have going into this. If you're going into this coming from a non-technical background like marketing or payroll or something, then it's going to be overwhelming enough for you just to learn and memorize the CCNA level of stuff, much less the CCNP level of stuff right on top of that. So if that describes you, you're sort of non-technical in nature and you're thinking of moving to this technical realm, even if you know in your head, okay, I got a very short window of time here to get my NA and my NP, I think you're going to burn out if you try to study both the NA and the NP level stuff all at once. I would really focus on, okay, let's just hit it hard for the NA, learn that NA as fast as I can, and then with the remaining time I have left, go for my NP. Now, if you do have some foundation of networking already under your belt, then yeah, that would probably be a practical approach. You could probably do it from the approach of, okay, you know, I already know a little bit about routing, I already know a little bit about switching, but I don't know anything about virtual private networks. And I know there's a little bit of virtual private networking in the CCNA, and there's a little bit more maybe at the CCNP. In that particular case, that probably might be a good idea to learn that whole set of VPN stuff up front. So yeah, that'd probably be a good approach. And yes, your local library, if you don't have a lot of money, your local library is going to have a lot of collections of networking books that you can use. Might not be for the most recent exam, but the CCNA, let's see here, the CCNA was updated 2016, I think is when the CCNA version 3 came out. So it's been about a year, maybe. So your local library might have some books that are relevant to the CCNA version 3 exam, but just be aware of that. All right. Someone's also asking, after passing the CCNA, can I apply for the CCDE? Fortunately, I can't answer that one. I know what the CCDE is. That's a Cisco Certified Design Expert. But I'm not familiar with what qualifications, if any, are needed for that. Someone's saying yes, that yes, you can go directly to CCDE, but take a short breather. Good advice. Good advice. Go and relax for a little bit. All right, so what else do we have here? All right, so I've talked about the blueprints. I've covered those. I've talked about the Cisco Press books, talked about Safari Online Books. You can just Google that, Safari Online Books, which is a great way to get access to a lot of books. Amazon. So I think that covers it for this particular section here. All right, next section, studying tips. What can you do to make the most effective and efficient use of your time? All right, so there's a lot of resources out there for you to prepare for your CCNA. So these are not in any particular order, but let's go through them. So clearly, videos, books, and online documents. Now, if you're like me, I don't learn something well just by watching a single video and then I'm done, or reading about it in one book and then I'm done. It doesn't really stick in my brain that well. I have to take a particular topic. For example, if I was learning about spanning tree for the first time, it doesn't really gel until I've read about it in at least like 4 different sources. The way I study is basically I will read about a chapter about that particular topic in like the Cisco official press book, and then I'll Google it and I'll read like 4 or 5 different articles on that from different authors. And just by seeing the way different people describe it using different ways, that's how it sort of coagulates and gels in my head so it sticks in there. It has been proven, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, but from a learning perspective, it's been proven that the more of your senses you can get involved in the learning process, the easier it is to memorize things and put into your long-term memory. So that's why I actually recommend that you not only read, but you watch videos as well, right? Because if you're reading, well, yeah, you're involving your sense of sight. But if you're doing videos, that's sight as well as sound. Maybe you can have someone, peel an onion in front of your nose while you're studying to get, the sense of smell going on there too. But, however you want to think about it, the more senses you can get involved, and you can think of some creative ways to do that, the more of this stuff will process into your long-term memory. So that's a little tip for you right there. But I would definitely recommend looking at videos. We've got a whole plethora of videos here at INE on the CCNA topics. Read a lot of those books and do a lot of Googling. There's a lot of great authors out there that publish stuff on these topics. Utilize a lot of practice exams. So I want to take this opportunity right here to show you. If you go to our site, actually not that, members.ine.com, and I'll go ahead and full screen this for you here. So once you go on here, actually even if you're not an INE member, you can just type streaming.ine.com and you can see a listing of all the videos that we have. And so this is what you can see right here, not only Cisco, but VMware, CompTIA, all kinds of stuff. So for example, I'm going to choose Cisco, CCNA, routing and switching. And so you can see here, even if you're not an INE member, you get a listing of all the videos. And a lot of these video series, if you click on them, a lot of them have like 1 or 2 videos that are absolutely free. You can just click on and see like the first 1 or 2 videos just to get a feel for whether or not you like the instructor and how he or she presents and stuff like that. So I would definitely look through here. So we got our videos in here, but another thing I want to talk about is we have some practice exams as well, in case you weren't familiar with those. So you can see here down the bottom towards the last row, there is a CCNA routing and switching practice exam. And if I click on that, and you take this, so this practice exam that we create here has 60 questions in it, and its questions are pulled from a larger pool, so you won't always get the same questions. You can do this as many times as you want, if you're an INE member or you've purchased a CCNA bundle or something like that. And it's also timed, so it's 90 minutes, so it tries to sort of emulate the experience that you would have when you're actually taking the CCNA. So if you click on this right here, so you can see, for example, the timer on the upper left corner is counting down right there. You can pause that. Now that's not something you can do in real life, in the real CCNA, but you could pause it if you need to take a meeting or something like that. Tells you what question you're on, question 1 of 60. If I scroll back here, select the best answer. So you got some questions here with topology diagrams. Just select what you want. I'm just going to randomly select some stuff right here. Let's see here. This one says select 2 answers. All right, just randomly select some things here. And let's say I didn't want to do the whole 60 questions. All right, I say, oh, I'm 30 questions into it and I've run out of time. I got to leave. I could say, all right, end and submit for grading. Are you sure you want to do that? Yes. And they'll give you a score report. Wow, I did horrible. I got everything wrong. But you can see here, and it also gives you the same percentages of questions. And what I mean by that is, when you go back to the blueprint, it'll say like you'll get 26% IP routing. You'll get 5% of IP services. So this also breaks the questions up into those same relevant percentages as you would see on the CCNA exam. And if you click on one of these ones you got wrong, it'll show you. It says, okay, this is what you selected here in orange, and here in green, this is the correct answer. And many of these questions also have a video walkthrough, which is of yours truly talking about the question and explaining what the correct answer was. Now that's just one of many different approaches. So there's also You'll see there's a lot of different vendors out there that have online practice exams. I would definitely recommend getting a hold of as many practice exams as you can and taking them over and over and over again. You'll want to do that. Flashcards. This is one of my favorite tools for memorizing stuff. And CCNA, lot of memorization. You got to do a lot of gory memorization. So I would definitely recommend getting like some 3x5 note cards at Office Depot or Staples or something like that, Target. And on the front of the flashcard, write a question to yourself. You know, what's the IP protocol number for TCP? And on the back of the flashcard, write 6, right? So create flashcards for yourself. And once again, you're getting your senses involved. Now you're getting your sense of touch involved as you're creating questions for yourself and answers. And then because you have these flashcards, take them with you everywhere you go. You know, take them with you in the car. When you're at a stoplight and waiting for it to turn green, whip out a flashcard and test yourself. You know, when you're at lunch at work, whip out those flashcards, test yourself. I also put here, get your friends and family involved. You know, there's nothing more that your wife is going to love than to give her a set of flashcards and she can embarrass you by saying how badly you do on the questions that you did yourself, right? So have your friends, have your family, have your dog, right? Have them all get involved by testing you on the flashcard questions that you created. And do that over and over and over again. Refer back to old topics often. It's very easy to forget the older stuff that you memorized, right? I mean, preparing for the CCNA, let's just take ICND 1. People ask me, how long does it take to prepare for this exam? Well, that depends on you. It depends on how much time you have to study, how quickly you memorize things. I think the shortest amount of time I've ever heard of someone passing the ICND 1 who had like 0 networking knowledge was maybe like 2 months. And that was someone who was unemployed, who was studying like 6 hours a day, every day, and they were able to knock that out in a couple of months. I would say if you've got a regular day job and you're doing this in the evenings or during your lunch break, you should devote, you know, at least a good, 4 months minimum studying for each one of these tests. And I tell people you probably want to devote a minimum of like an hour and a half a day minimum during the weekday and a good 3 or 4 hours on the weekends. It's going to take a lot of your time to do this. And what I mean by this, refer back to old topics often is, you know, when you're 3 months into it, if you don't go back to the stuff that you were studying back in month number 1 or week number 2, you will forget it. Right? So go back to those old topics, and that's another benefit of making those flashcards, is now you've got stuff you can go back to refer and refresh your memory. Frequent lab practice. All right, let me emphasize this. So like I mentioned, the CCNA exam is a computer-based exam. Okay, you're not actually going to get on real routers and real switches and have to configure or troubleshoot things. Although you will have those simulation questions that pop up every now and then. So people have asked me, they said, Keith, is it theoretically possible that I could watch your videos, read some books, make some flashcards, memorize, never touch a router or switch at all, and pass the exam? And yes, it is theoretically possible that you could do that, right? I could theoretically write a paper in French, never speaking a word of French. If I just study books on it, memorize the language, I could write a paper. But does that mean I can actually speak French? Does that actually mean I can use the language in more ways than just writing a paper? No, right? You're pursuing the CCNA probably for one of 2 reasons. Either you want to apply for a job, you want to move into the networking industry, and you want to have a CCNA on your resume, or you want to keep your existing job, but you want a promotion, you want more responsibilities, and those more responsibilities require that you know more stuff. Either way, if you're getting your CCNA, it's telling people you can do something. It means, hey, I know more than just passing a test, right? If I get my driver's license exam, but I don't actually know how to drive a car, what good is that? Same thing here. With the CCNA, even though it's mostly multiple choice questions, you need to know the commands. You need to know how to get onto routers and switches and configure those VLANs and trunks and OSPF and access lists and all that other stuff. And the best way to memorize those commands is by doing lab practice. So let's talk a little bit about how do I do that. I don't know what a router or switch looks like. I wouldn't even know where to get one. How do I do lab practice? There's a variety of ways. Certainly, if you have the resources to do so, you could always go on to eBay or some other site and buy yourself some routers and switches, rack them and stack them in your house, cable them together, and play with them right there. And they're available 24/7 for you to do whatever you want to do right there. But there are some downsides. Number one, there's the cost. Now, these days, you can get routers and switches fairly cheap. You know, there's a lot of routers and switches you can get for less than $100. But there is that upfront cost. Number two, electricity. These things consume a lot of electricity. If you leave them on all the time, your electric bill is going to shoot through the roof. So be aware of that. Number three, they generate a lot of heat. I sure hope that room, that office where you're setting them up in, has good air conditioning, because if you shut that door and you start playing around, your room's going to get to 90 degrees very, very fast. So get ready to just, do it in your toga or whatever you're going to wear in there, because it's going to get hot in that room. So, and then number four, your wife might say, what is this mess? When are you going to get rid of this stuff? Then you got to contend with that. So there's, all sorts of downsides to making your own lab, and the stuff does not hold its value. Don't think that, hey, I bought a router for $300 when I'm done, I'll just sell it for $300. No. If you buy a router right now for $300 when you're done, you might be lucky to get $100 for that router, if that. So don't plan on recuperating your money from this equipment after you're done studying and you've passed your certification. So for all those reasons, I recommend using other equipment. Now, there's two different ways to do that. Number one, you could use other people's equipment, log into it remotely, and do labs. Let me show you our method for that so you can be familiar with this approach. So if you go to the INE members page, here we go. So you will see that here towards the top there's a section called Rack Rentals. I'm going to click on that. We have a really large data center in Nevada that's got tons of routers and switches and servers and all kinds of stuff. And we've broken them up into different topologies. For example, if you're studying for your CCIE, you might want to rent some time on the CCIE routing and switching topology. But for these purposes, I want to draw your attention down here to the CCNA and CCNP routing and switching. So this, if you rent time on this, is an actual rack of real equipment. You've got 4 real physical routers and 3 physical switches. So it's not emulated, it's not simulated, it's real stuff. And you rent time on this, so step number one is you need to buy some tokens for yourself. You can see this costs 3 tokens an hour. If there's no sales and you just buy the token at the full retail price, it's like $1 for 1 token. So this equates to roughly $3 an hour to rent time on here. But INE is having sales all the time on tokens where you can get them for 20, 30, 50% off. So most likely you'll be able to get a sale on that. So maybe start out with like 100 tokens or something like that, something small. And then rent time on this equipment. So you would schedule it. So I'll click on schedule here. So right now this tells me, see how it has a start date of today? It's available right now. If I wanted to rent it for 3 hours, I could rent it for 3 hours for 9 tokens. I could get on there right now. I say, oh, I don't want to do it right now. I want to do it this weekend. So maybe Saturday. I want to do it on Saturday from 1 o'clock until Saturday at, let's say, 3 o'clock. Done, search, and there it is. And then I can schedule, I can book it for 6 tokens. Now what's it going to look like when I actually get there? Well, let's go back to this. Once you have a rack assigned, like for example, I've got a rack assigned that I use all the time. This is what I use for my demonstrations. When I'm teaching my boot camps, I also use this. So you can see I've got it reserved for like forever, 11 months and whatever days. So when your session is ready, this is what you'll see right here. And you can click on this thing here called Control Panel. It'll give you what your login and password is. I will change this at the end of the session, so you guys won't be able to use that. But here's an example of what the topology is. You can see the 4 routers, the 3 switches, and there's a couple things you can do with this. At I&E, we do have workbooks, so if you like working with labs that are already pre-made and going through it, you can do that. For example, I'll click here on workbooks, and I'll show you, for example, the ICND1 lab workbook. So you just go through these tasks right here. For example, let's say I want to do port security, task 1.9. Okay, so it'll actually show you, here's the topology, this is what you're going to be building, and the task is, these are your objectives. This is what you need to be able to do. And so you'd look at that, you'd log onto the equipment, you'd try to make that work, and then once you're done, you'd click on configuration, and it shows you, here's the commands you should have typed. It gives you a little bit of explanation, verification. And some of these lab tasks have pre-configurations that you would download. Let me see if I have one in here that I can show you for that. How about IPv6? No, let's not do IPv6. How about access lists? Okay, so for example, right here, it says from the rack rental control panel, load the configuration titled, and that gives you this configuration here. So what this is, if you go to the rack rental control panel, and where is that? Right there. Right here are a whole bunch of configurations that you can preload. So for example, CCNA V3 ICND workbook, IPv6-1. If I was doing the IPv6 task, I would select that, select load config, and then in the background, it will pre-configure those routers and switches with a variety of stuff, like it might pre-configure them with addresses, with routing protocols, so you can skip all that and just work on the specific task that you need to work on. So that's one of the benefits of using our rack rentals, is that you don't have to have it in your house. It's available 24/7. It's real equipment. If you're going through a workbook, you've got a workbook you can use. Now, if you're like me, you know, I prefer to create my own lab. So as I'm like reading something, for example, as I'm reading a chapter on network address translation, let's say, and I'm reading it, I'm studying it, I'll like have a piece of paper next to me. As I'm starting to understand how it works, I'll say, oh, okay. I'll think to myself, if I want to lab this up, what is the minimum quantity of devices I could use to lab this up? And I say, oh, okay, well, with network address translation, I probably want to have a minimum of like 3 devices. So I'll start drawing a topology. Well, let's see here. I could do 3 routers, connect them together, and as I start reading, I start thinking about, okay, how would I implement NAT on this topology? And so by the time I'm done reading the chapter, I've got a piece of paper where I've drawn up a network diagram, I've drawn up a topology, I've drawn in my IP addresses, I've maybe put arrows in there as far as where I want the traffic to be coming from and going to. And maybe at the bottom of that topology, I'll write some bullet points about my objectives. I'll say, router 1 will be the client, router 2, NAT router, translating addresses from incoming fast Ethernet 00 to outgoing fast Ethernet 01. And I'll do all that. And then what I'll do is I'll open up a text editor like Notepad or WordPad or something. I'm doing this all before my session begins on my rack. I'm trying to make my rack session as expedited and efficient as possible. And in Notepad or WordPad, I'll type out what I think the configuration should be. Based on what I've learned, I'd say, okay, enable, type that in, config T, type that in, interface fast Ethernet 00, IPNAT inside. So by the time I'm done, I've got a text document of all the commands from beginning to end, including exit and end and other commands like that, that I think will make my lab work. Now I get into my lab, my 2 or 3 hours I've reserved. I go into the device. It's clean slate. There's nothing on it. I take my text file and I copy and I paste it onto my router. Now there's probably some errors in there, especially if I'm doing this for the first time and I don't know the commands very well. But this is a great way to memorize the commands, because as I do this, I can see, oh, that command didn't paste in very well. Let's see, oh, there's supposed to be a hyphen right there, or oh, I misspelled this word. And so by writing up your commands and your configuration ahead of time from memory or from what you're reading in the book in a text editor and then pasting into your router switch, to me, that is a more efficient way of memorizing the commands and using the rack time that you've rented. And this way you can build your own labs. Just start out with this 7 topology 7 device topology here and just create labs that you want to work on. You don't have to work from somebody else's labs from a workbook. Now there's other things as well I want to show you. For example, a very popular free program that you can download is called Packet Tracer. And there's a lot of YouTube videos here on how to use Packet Tracer. It looks like this. So you basically sign up for Cisco Network Academy. You can do it all online. Doesn't cost you anything. You don't actually have to participate in the Cisco Networking Academy. You just create a login and username and you can download it. So just Google download Cisco Packet Tracer. And you'll find a website where you can log in and then download the software for free. And Cisco Packet Tracer is a simulator. So kind of like the actual Cisco exam, this is not real Cisco IOS. This is simulated iOS. So it's some software that's sort of looking like iOS. But once you start it up, in Cisco Packet Tracer, you can develop your own topologies like you can see here, drag and drop certain devices, make it look however you want to look. You can go into a device and you can actually get into the command line and practice your iOS commands like you see right here. And this is all free. From a CCNA perspective, you can pretty much do anything you would want to do with Packet Tracer. Now what I will say is, once you go beyond the CCNA, let's say you want to pursue the CCNP on up, at that point Packet Tracer starts to become not as workable. There are more advanced features like switching features and router features that are not available in Packet Tracer, where you would really need to have real Cisco IOS to do those features. But for the CCNA, this is great. This is really all you need. This will work just fine. Another option you have, instead of Packet Tracer, is something called GNS3. Now GNS3 requires you to have a real Cisco IOS software image, just like you would download on a Cisco router. So you'll have to be a Cisco customer or somehow get your hands on a real Cisco IOS software image and just save it in your laptop, in your documents folder or something like that. Because what GNS3 is, it's this software that sort of emulates a Cisco router. When you load GNS3 and then you put your Cisco software into it, the Cisco software thinks it's operating on a real Cisco router, but it's not. Your laptop is a Cisco router, and GNS3 sort of makes the software believe it looks like a router. So for example, like here, you can create your own topology diagram like this, on a piece of paper or something. Once you've created your topology diagram, you can just go into GNS3, and then you can just start creating that topology. You can drag and drop things. For example, here we click on a router. We can drag that into the topology and start connecting them together with links. And this way is very similar to Packet Tracer, where you're just sort of dragging and dropping onto the page the devices you need for your topology. And then once you're done with that, then you can actually log into those devices. As we're going to see right here, we start them all up. And then we log into the command line of those devices. And now here, you are actually logging into real Cisco IOS. All the features, all the bugs, everything that would be in a regular Cisco IOS image is here, because that's what you're using. You're using real Cisco IOS. Now there's just a couple of minor downsides to GNS3. Like I mentioned, number one, you do have to have access to a real Cisco IOS image. So you'll have to figure out how you want to do that. Number two, it does consume quite a bit of memory. I mean, a single router running iOS, that one iOS image on that one router could easily contain, take up 256 megs of memory just to run that one router. So as you start creating topologies that are larger, like 10 routers, 15 routers, be aware, hey, I've only got a certain amount of memory in my laptop. The memory in my laptop that's also running my, Chrome and my email and Windows itself is now being shared with these iOS images that I'm duplicating, and duplicating as I create larger and larger images, larger topologies. Packet Tracer, you don't have to worry about that, right? Packet Tracer does not consume a lot of memory, but this, the bigger your topology scales, the more memory it's actually going to consume in your laptop. So just be aware of that. But GNS3 is a great tool. As far as routing technologies and anything you could do on a router, You can use GNS3 from the CCNA all the way up to the CCIE, everything that's in there. Unfortunately, it's a little light on switching technologies, but for routing technologies, awesome. All right, so that deals with labs. Last thing I want to talk about is Wireshark. It's one thing to read in a book that says, okay, you got two routers here and they're talking to each other via EIGRP, as an example. And they're sending each other EIGRP updates that contain new routing information. That's one thing to see that in a book, to sort of visualize it or see it in a diagram. It's a whole other thing to actually see it for yourself. Wireshark is a fantastic tool. It's free, so just go to Google and type Wireshark, or you just go to wireshark.org. And when you download Wireshark and you turn it on, it's basically a tool that takes your Wi-Fi card or your wired NIC card, whichever one you specify, and captures and displays for you every single frame that was captured on that device. So for example, right now I've got my laptop connected via wired Ethernet cable to a switch here. So I'm just going to start capturing here just for a couple of seconds. All right, that's probably good enough. Go ahead and stop here at this point. And so for example, here in this one capture, I've captured a whole bunch of spanning tree stuff. Like I said, it's one thing to read about spanning tree, but it's a whole other thing to capture the spanning tree frame and be able to open it up and see what's inside of it. For example, you can see, let me make this a little bit bigger. You can see, oh, okay, yeah, take a look at that. That's your Ethernet header. You can see the source MAC address of the switch, the destination MAC address of spanning tree itself. You can see the LLC header and all the fields in there, and when I open it up, I can see the contents of the BPDU. I can see all the different fields in here, and a lot of times as you're looking at this, it'll raise questions in your mind, like, well, let's see here. BPDU flags, topology change and topology change acknowledgement. What's that? And that'll lead you to start researching that. You'll go on to Google and you'll start finding yourself researching stuff, and the light bulb will go on as you see the format of these different fields and how this protocol data unit is put together. And Wireshark is not just for direct connections to your laptop. This is another benefit of GNS3, is that when you have a topology in GNS3, like two routers connected together, GNS3 comes bundled with Wireshark. So you can actually click on the link that's connecting that router to that switch or that router to that router and open up Wireshark, and you can see what the routers are sending back and forth. You can see what an EIGRP packet looks like. You can see what a BGP update looks like. I highly recommend that you get familiar with Wireshark. Or just basic stuff, right? As you're learning about the CCNA, you're going to start learning about, what exactly happens when I open up a web page. You'll learn about things like, DNS, how you resolve a web page to an IP address. Wireshark can really bring that into vivid color for you by seeing what the DNS transaction looks like. You'll learn about TCP versus UDP. And you can use this to see the TCP headers and the UDP headers and see, oh, interesting. My web browsing uses TCP, but when I did DNS, that used UDP. So it's just a really great way to bring into vivid color what's going on under the hood of networking that you normally just don't see with your real eyes. All right, so let me go back here. All right, let me check. Is the stream still going for you guys? I got a couple of comments a while ago that the stream had stopped. I just want to check. Is everybody else still able to see and hear everything? Can someone just type something into the comment section there just to make sure that I haven't been talking to dead air. Okay, great. So on the I&E side of things, it looks like everything's working, still up. Okay, awesome, great. Thank you guys and gals. Let me see here. There's been a lot of questions that have come in via YouTube. Let me see if there's anything here that stands out. I don't have any experience with CCNA security, so I can't answer the question of whether or not Packet Tracer is good enough for CCNA security. I know CCNA security has you learn about not just routers and switches, but other devices as well, like firewalls and things. I don't know if Packet Tracer has that. For those of you who are watching via YouTube, if anybody has any experience with Packet Tracer, you can maybe let us know if that would work for CCNA security as well. Let's see. Okay, I don't see, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that came in. I'm just scanning to see if there's any questions here that I could answer real quick. And I would agree with Network Chuck. He posted a comment here saying, don't waste your time with the Network Plus. Just go directly to the CCENT, which is the same thing as the ICND1. I would agree with that. So, I mean, Network Plus has got some good stuff in it. It's supposed to be more of a vendor-neutral certification, whereas Cisco's clearly focuses on Cisco equipment. But I think in the industry, a CCENT and a CCNA carries a little bit more weight when it comes to getting a job than the Network Plus certification. All right. Now this next section here is going to be fairly quick. This is my own personal observations about some of the takeaways I had from the test when I've taken it the last couple of times, which will answer some more of your nitty-gritty questions. For example, quantity of questions and time. I've already talked about that. So on Cisco's website, you'll actually tell you can expect somewhere between 50 and 60 questions. Now this is for the CCNA composite exam, and you're given 90 minutes. So definitely you're given 90 minutes. That is a hard and fast timer. You can't exceed that. Like I mentioned earlier, the last time I took the CCNA composite exam, I actually got 64 questions, even though it said 50 to 60. So just be prepared. There might be a tiny little bit more than what you see here. What about scoring? So perfect score is 1,000, and you need 810 to pass. But as you're going along the test, you won't know what you've gotten, right? When you're on question number 20, you won't know. Do I already have 400 points? Do I have 300 points? You have no idea until you're done with the test and you press submit. So there's just no way to know until the test is done. I already mentioned that I've seen anywhere from 1 to about 4 simulations, about 1 to 4 of those testlet questions as well. This is a definite recommendation. And this is what I've done from the CCNA all the way to the CCIE. Now let's say you're done with the test, you press submit, and you passed it. Great, go out, have a party, get that $500,000 a year job, whatever it is, pat yourself on the back. But if you're like, 80% of us, when you take the CCNA for the first time, or the CCNP, or the CCIE, you probably are not going to pass. This is what I recommend. As you're taking the test, when you come across those questions that are like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what the question is, or how to answer this, or oh, I think I studied that, but it's been a long time. Remember, they give you that 11 by 17 piece of laminated paper, right? Somewhere on there, write a little note to yourself about those questions that stumped you. Hopefully there's not going to be too many of them, but you might write, okay, let's see here. Here was a question on frame relay DELCs. I have no idea what that is. Write that on your little piece of paper. Write on your piece of paper, OSPF hello time, because I got a question on that and I didn't know what the answer was. IPv6 link local address. So before you're done with the test, you'll have on that laminated piece of paper some real brief notes about the questions that stumped you. Okay? All right, so now you submit the test for grading. You see, oh, you failed it. okay? Now, before you get up, look at that piece of paper and try to quickly memorize those little bullet points you just looked at. Say, okay, let's see, IPv6 link local address, got to remember that, got to remember that. Frame relay Delsius, got to remember that, got to remember that. Okay, now, you walk out of the testing center, right? Tears are pouring down your face, you're whipping yourself, you're flogging yourself, and you're walking back to your car. You sit down in your car or the bus or whatever you're taking. Before you turn on the key, this is what you want to do. At that moment, those questions that stumped you, those questions that you struggle with are going to be more clear to you than any other moment in time. You want to whip out your tablet, your smartphone, and you want to record your voice. It might look kind of weird to people who are walking by your car in the parking lot, but you're going to want to sit back, close your eyes, and start recording yourself. Okay, there was a question in there on IPv6 link local addresses. I didn't know that. There was a question in there on OSPF hello timers. Totally got that one wrong. Question on there on how to create a spanning tree root bridge. Didn't get that right. And just verbally dump into your recording device all those questions and topics that you had to guess on, that you totally flubbed it, that you just know, I didn't know that. After a few minutes, you're going to be all, okay, I think that's it. I can't remember any questions. All right, that covers it. End. Stop your recording. Now, drive home. Don't try to do that after you've driven home, because in the 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes it takes you to get back to the office, back to your house, you will forget a lot of that stuff. Do it right there outside the testing center. And now when you get home at some point in time, play that recording back to yourself and write it down on a piece of paper. And now you've got a study guide. Now you've got an outline of those topics that you know you did not do well on, and you can study those. But my point is, you want to capture that information while it's fresh in your mind the moment you've left that testing center before you start to forget them. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, and I'll go and see if I can cover any questions I didn't already get a chance to answer. Some common pitfalls. What are some things that make preparing for the CCNA harder than it really needs to be? Number one, failing to create or adhere to a dedicated schedule. If you wake up this morning and you have the best of intentions in your head, you say, I am absolutely going to study for an hour and a half for my CCNA today. You say that. Well, if that's all the plans you have, 10:30 at night is going to roll around and you're going to look back and say, oh my gosh, I totally forgot to study for the CCNA today. I got totally wrapped up in this project. My boss pulled me away here. When I got home, my kids pulled me away and I had to do this, and now I'm exhausted, and the whole day went by and I didn't study. So what's the point behind that? Create a schedule for yourself. Ideally, carve out like an hour and a half every day at the same time of day to where you get used to, this is my time to study. Every single Monday through Friday from 3 to 4:30 or from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'm going to sequester myself, and that's the time I'm going to use for studying for my CCNA. Don't check your emails. Don't check your voicemails. Don't check what the latest weather is or the Hurricane Irma predictions or whatever it is. Use that time to focus yourself and study. Unless the house is burning down around you, don't let anything else distract you. You know, tell your wife, tell your husband, hey honey, I'm going to the room now. I'm going to study for my CCNA. You know, unless someone's dying or choking on an apple, don't bother me. And dedicate that time every day for studying. If you don't do that, if it's not part of your calendar, it's not going to happen. Number two, becoming overwhelmed. Common for everybody. Like I said, those books, massively thick. Anybody who says that the CCNA is an easy test has no idea what they're talking about. When I hold my CCNA boot camps here in Raleigh and coming up in San Jose, unfortunately, every once in a while I'll get a student who comes in there who'll say, oh yeah, my manager said I should just take this class and then go pass the test next week and get my CCNA. And I look at that person and I say, does your manager have any idea what's involved in the CCNA? It's not simply taking a 1-week class and then going and passing it. That's not going to happen. There is so much stuff to memorize, and it's very easy to become overwhelmed at the sheer magnitude of it. That's why I say, give yourself time. Don't force yourself into a box where you say, I am going to give myself 1 month and I'm going to get the CCNA. It's not going to happen. You know, unless you you can memorize a page, instantly like that. It's not going to happen. Give yourself a minimum of 3 months, absolute minimum, before you go and attempt the CCNA the first time around. And like I said, go back to the old topics a lot. Don't say, oh my gosh, I'm a month into it and I still have this much in the table of contents to cover. That will burn you out. You will get overwhelmed. Don't do that. Just keep plugging forward. Refer to your flashcards frequently. Refer to those practice exams and focus on the fact that you are making incremental progress. Because after 3 or 4 months, you're going to look back and you're going to say, wow, look at all the stuff that I learned. I had no idea how to do IP addressing 3 months ago. I had no idea what OSPF even meant 3 months ago. It's incremental, steady progress. Don't be overwhelmed at the forest. Look at the trees and keep moving forward one tree at a time. Not learning IP addressing and subnetting well. You're going to get questions on IP addressing and subnetting, especially in the ICMD 1 exam. You're going to get a lot of questions on that. You don't want to walk into that exam and not know the subnet masks by heart. In other words, right now, if I said, give me a dotted decimal, give me the dotted decimal equivalent of /29, you should instantly be able to come up with 255, 255, 255, 248. That fast. If I tell you, okay, a subnet mask is 255, 255, 255, 240, what is that? You should instantly be able to say, oh, 240, okay, that's a /28. You should be able to come up with those. You should be able to instantly say, okay, a /29 means that there are 5 bits of hosts left. Or no, not 5, 20, and 30, 3 bits of hosts left. Anyway, you get the idea, right? You want to walk into that test and just have the subnet masks, how many bits are left of hosts, how many bits are left for networks. You want to have all that stuff down pat in your head really, really well. You don't want to waste a lot of time trying to figure out the decimal to binary conversion as that 90-minute clock is counting down. You want to have that memorized really well. What I call neglecting the trivial points, right? These are people who walk into the CCNA saying, well, okay, I understand how EIGRP works. They form a neighbor relationship, they exchange routes, okay, and OSPF is kind of like that. But if you ask them questions like, okay, what's the name of the specific packet that EIGRP uses to form a neighbor relationship? How often is that packet exchanged? These are people who would say, oh, well, I don't really know that. What's the number of what's the port number of HTTP? The port number of Telnet? They don't know that. This is what some people would consider trivial stuff, but you need to know it. And this is the stuff that really is going to rack your brain when it comes to memorization. This is why you need those flashcards. All those little numbers, those timers, those hello timers, dead timers, hold timers, protocol numbers, port numbers. You do want to spend time memorizing that. You might think it's trivial, and yeah, it's true. In the real world, do you need to memorize the port number for Telnet? No. You could just look it up on Google in like 3 seconds. But you don't have Google when you're taking the test. They expect you to have that stuff memorized. So even if you're just memorizing it in your short-term memory just to get through the exam, you still got to memorize it. And that pretty much concludes what I had to say in this presentation. So let me go back now and see if there are any unanswered questions. I don't have anything left in my presentation notes here. Let's see if there's anything unanswered here. How do you spell networking? C-I-S-C-O. Yes, exactly. All right, I don't see any questions there. If you have any unanswered questions, feel free at this point to ask me, and I'll do my best to answer them. Let me scroll back. And yeah, please, If you enjoy a live bootcamp experience, I would love to have you come to my CCNA bootcamps. I'm the actual instructor for our CCNA routing and switching bootcamp, as well as our CCNP route and our CCNP switch bootcamps. So I would love to see you there. There's one thing about watching a video and everything, but there's another thing about sitting in a classroom environment and actually being able to ask me questions as I'm talking about stuff. And I can say, oh, that's a good question. Well, here's an example. You know, you're a router, I'm a router, I send you this message, or maybe I'll whiteboard something, or we'll whip up labs on the fly to test something out or do demonstrations. So I would encourage you to attend our live ILT, CCNA, and CCNP boot camps. I love giving them, and students seem to love being there. So love to see you there. Someone's asking me to talk something about Viral, Cisco's Viral, which stands for the Virtual Internet Router Lab. So yeah, let me just talk about that briefly. So like GNS3, Viral uses real Cisco IOS images. But there are some things about it that I'm not a huge fan of. For one thing, it's not free. You got to pay for Viral. It's not a whole lot. I think it's like $200 for a year or something like that. And then with that, it comes included with everything. But one of the things I don't like about Viral, and for some of you this might not be a big deal or not, but you have to have internet connectivity to do Viral. GNS3, it's all self-contained on your laptop. I could do it, you know, in my basement. I could do it out in the forest somewhere. I don't have to worry about having internet connectivity or slow or choppy internet connectivity. I don't need internet connectivity at all to do GNS3. And that's one of the things I like about it. The other thing is Viral, it's been a little while since I've looked at, so unless they've made some significant changes to it, they being Cisco, Viral, my experience was it was very complex to get it up and running. You know, someone has no networking knowledge, right? Somebody who says, hey, you know, I work in marketing or I work in human resources. My computer knowledge is I know how to bring up my email, I know how to browse the internet, but that's about it. Well, that person's going to have a heck of a time using Viral because it's really complex and just to get it working and get it running. GNS3 and Packet Tracer, super easy. I mean, like 4 or 5 steps, it's there, it's running, it's good to go. Viral, not so much. So those are the two main downsides I don't like about Viral. The fact that you need internet connectivity to run it, and the fact that it's super complicated just to get it working in the first place. And it also, now there are forms of Viral, I've heard that where you can do it on your laptop, still requires internet connectivity. So there's some Viral where everything's being installed on a remote server, and you're using your internet connectivity just basically to get to that server so you can do your stuff. There's other forms of Viral where most everything's on your laptop or your server, but you still need internet connectivity for some background tasks. But even when it's on your laptop, it uses up a lot of memory. I think it uses up even more than GNS3. So that's sort of a third downside, is that it can consume a ton of memory in your device. Let's see here. Somebody asked, how much time will I get after passing the ICND1 for the ICND2? You can schedule your ICND2 like 24 hours after your ICND1. I mean, they're 2 separate exams. But like I said, after passing your ICND1, I would give yourself another good 3 or 4 months minimum of dedicated study time before going and taking your ICND2 exam. They're 2 separate exams. ICND2 has a whole bunch of new stuff in it that goes above and beyond what you learned at ICND1. So it's going to take you several months to prepare for that exam. Would you recommend passing the composite exam? Like I said, just depends on your background knowledge. If you're going into it and you've already been working in the networking field, you already know IP addressing, you sort of have a baseline knowledge of LAN switching and routing, then yeah, go ahead and take the composite exam. But for someone who has little to no networking knowledge, I think it'd be too overwhelming to do the composite exam. Let's see, what else do we have on here? Somebody asked, hey, if I get an INE All Access Pass, are the boot camps included in that? No, they are not. The INE All Access Pass gives you access to every single video that we have, thousands and thousands of hours of video on everything. That's what you get with the All Access Pass. But the boot camps are an additional expense. You don't need an All Access Pass to attend a boot camp, but a boot camp is a totally separate product offering that we offer. Someone asked, are there any tips I can give on progressing through the progress of CCNA through CCNP and then through to the CCIE? The process is pretty much the same, even at the CCNP and CCIE level. A lot of flashcards, read a lot of different sources of documentation to see how different authors present the same thing in different ways. A lot of hands-on practice time. For the CCNP, the only thing I would mention is currently the CCNP is 3 exams, 3 separate exams. You've got switch, route, and T-shoot. I personally would recommend that people take it in that order. Switch first, route second, T-shoot last. Some people do route first and then switch. That's really your own personal preference. You definitely want to save T-shoot for last if you're pursuing the CCNP. I recommend switch first because if you take a look at the blueprints, the switch blueprint and all the stuff that's in that is about 1/4 to 1/5 the size of the route blueprint. The route blueprint has a lot more stuff than switch. So I personally would get overwhelmed if I was studying route first, then followed by switch. So I would knock out switch first, then followed by route. Let's see, what else do we have here? And yeah, a couple of people have mentioned on the YouTube stream that as far as frame relay is concerned, that is true. In the CCNA, frame relay is out, so you don't have to know anything about frame relay, and they've introduced DMVPN. Now, let me make a little caveat with that. Back in the days when CCNA was frame relay was part of the CCNA, so we're talking about like pre-2016. Not only did you have to know frame relay concepts, you had to be able to configure it. You had to be able to troubleshoot it. That's no longer there. With DMVPN, you don't need to know how to configure it. You don't need to know how to troubleshoot it. At the CCNA level, they just want you to know what DMVPN is and the protocols that are involved and sort of like a high level, real high level of how those protocols work to provide a DMVPN solution. At present, now I'm just talking about routing and switching here, right? CCNA, CCNP, CCIE, routing and switching. At present, you don't have to know how to configure or troubleshoot DMVPN until you get to the CCIE level. It's not even part of the CCNP. Frame relay is still part of the CCNP at the moment. Now, I'm expecting Cisco will probably come out with a new set of CCNP exams fairly soon. Cisco's typical approach is once an exam comes out, it's usually good for about 3 or 4 years, and then they do a refresh, and they come out with a newer version. The last time the CCNP was updated was in 2014. So here we are 3 years later, coming upon the close of 2017. So for those of you who are thinking of pursuing your CCNP, you probably have somewhere between 6 months and a year would be my guess before they come up with a new set of CCNP exams. And at that time, I fully expect they'll probably strip frame relay out of it since they stripped it out of the CCNA. But right now, frame relay is still part of the CCNP exams. Somebody asked me, as far as the CCNA practice exams that INE has that I showed you, is that freely available? No, it's not. I think if you get like a CCNA bundle, it comes with that practice exam, and certainly if you get the All Access Pass, you have access to that practice exam that I showed you on INE's website, but it is not free. Somebody asked, as far as Cisco's Viral is concerned, is there any benefit to using Viral? Not at the CCNA level. At the CCNA level, I really don't, I think you'd be banging your head against a wall trying to get Viral up and working when there's a lot easier solutions with like Packet Tracer or GNS3. I think Packet Tracer is the best option for CCNA level, and here's why. It's from a switching perspective. When you're learning about the switching technologies, specifically things like port security and ether channel, those are things that you can't really do in GNS3. They're just not available to you. But Packet Tracer, you can do all that stuff in Packet Tracer. Viral, as far as switching is concerned, they have a version of iOS which is called IOU, which is iOS on Unix. Back when I was working at Cisco, when that came out, it was like a super secret thing. Only Cisco employees were supposed to know about it, IOU. It's like, oh wow, here's a way where we can take an iOS image and run it on a server, and we can create these topologies without actually racking and stacking 15, 20 different routers and all the electrical requirements. We can just do it right here in a box, in a server, with iOS on Unix. And then they came out with L2 IOU, which was layer 2 or switching iOS on Unix. But here was the problem. And this is the problem that they still have today with Viral. A lot of the features that switches do are done in what's called in hardware, which means, you know, think about your laptop as an example. Your laptop has a brain, right, that we call the central processing unit, the CPU of your laptop. So a lot of stuff that takes place in that brain, right? That CPU is running Windows. That CPU is monitoring the heat and environmental conditions of your laptop. But there's certain things that CPU is not responsible for that are offloaded to other parts of your laptop. For example, your network interface card. When you learn about Ethernet and you learn about how Ethernet NIC cards work, you'll learn about how there's certain things that Ethernet does, certain rules that it plays by. Well, what Ethernet does, a lot of that stuff, most of that stuff, is not done in the CPU. It's actually offloaded to the network interface card. Now, what does that have to do with switches? Same type of thing. In switches, when we say that something is done in hardware, we mean that particular feature or protocol is not being done in the brain of the switch. The CPU is not doing it. There's special ASICs, transistors, and things like that that are specially designed to do that feature really fast, really efficiently, much better than if that same feature was being done in the processor. What does that have to do with all of this? When L2 IOU came out, all it did were the switching features that were done in software, in the CPU. For example, spanning tree, right? Spanning tree is something that the brain of the switch does, the CPU of the switch does, so they were able to port that into L2 IOU. But other stuff that you don't have to worry about the CCNA level. But when you get to the CCNP, stuff like private VLANs and VLAN access lists, and a lot of these switching security features are not done in the CPU. It's actually done in these specialized transistors and ASICs of the switch. L2 IOU doesn't do that. So even today, for most of your layer 2 switching features, when you get to the CCNP level on up, you really need access to real hardware. And that's where our racks come into play, because you can use real switches to do that. But for the CCNA level, I think Viral is way overkill. I think Packet Tracer or even GNS3 are just fine. Can you install a Viral switch into GNS3? Viral and GNS3 are two things designed to do basically the same type of thing. Both of them are a front end to make the software think it's running on a real device. So you can't put Viral into GNS3. They're two separate software applications that have the same objective. But GNS3 does support these layer 2 IOU switches just like Viral does. So if you have access to that, you can use that. Let's see, what else do we have here? And yeah, if that's something that interests you, there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to add an L2 switch into GNS3. I also, on INE here, I create a whole series of videos on how to use GNS3, starting at, how to find the software, how to download it, how to make sure you have enough memory. And in there, I also talk about, hey, if you've got a real physical switch, is there a way I can take that physical switch and connect it into your virtual topology in GNS3? And I talk about that as well. All right, I don't think I see... somebody else asked here, what are your thoughts on software-defined networking, SDN, and should we start learning Python or Ansible too? Whew, okay, well, at the CCNA level, they introduced the concept of software-defined networking. There's a certain bullet point on that, and you have to know, a handful of terms related to software-defined networking. You don't have to know how to actually do it, how to implement it, how to troubleshoot it, but that is definitely something that Cisco is pushing, that is on the horizon, starting to gain more and more traction. I would say, for now, just focus on what you need to focus on for the CCNA. Just focus on those topics. I would say, yeah, once you get the CCNA under your belt, it certainly will help you to learn things like Python. Right, a lot, this ability, and some people might be saying, Python, what is that? I've never heard of that before. Python is a scripting language. For example, well, it's a programming language, but being used for a lot of other stuff. For example, let's say you're a network engineer, and there's things that you find yourself doing in the network over and over and over again. For example, part of your job is every single day to log into the same 10 routers, issue the same 10 commands, and check to see if there's a particular output in the output of those commands. Well, you could use Python to create a script so that with just a single push of the button on your laptop, it automatically logs into those routers, automatically issues those commands, automatically parses through the output to look for a certain thing, and then gives you an indicator as to whether or not what you were looking for exists. Right? You could automate that. So that's one thing that Python is very good for. Right now, you don't need to know that for the CCNA. It's just sort of a useful additional tool that you could put in your tool belt if you know it. And I can't really speak to OpenConfig and Yang. I don't know anything about those, unfortunately. Where can you get the images for Nexus for GNS? You need to be a Cisco customer. Let's just put it that way. For GNS3, like I said, you have to have real Cisco IOS, or if you're working with Nexus images to put in there. There's a variety of ways to get those images, both legally and illegally. So I would just recommend taking the legal approach and getting them by being a Cisco customer and downloading them, and I'm not going to go beyond that. Somebody also asked, can you go for the CCNP data center after passing the CCNA routing and switching? So for that, let me go back to what we were looking at earlier here. So if I take, for example, Cisco CCNP data center, and a very common question of, does a particular exam require any prerequisites? Because that's what you're really asking, is are there prerequisites to these other exams? Here's how I'd answer that. CCNP data center, you can see a lot of tests for that. You got to take 4 exams for that. Let's just click on the first one here, 300-175. And right here, exam policies, read policies and requirements, all right? Age requirements, we don't care about that. Candidate rights, confidentiality. So it looks to me, exam and testing policies. Doesn't look like to me like the CCNP data center requires any prerequisites. I don't see any mention in here of prerequisites on their page. So I would assume that yes, the answer is yeah, you can go directly from the CCNA routing and switching to the CCNA data center. Someone's asking how you can get INE t-shirts. Well, I believe you can go to INE.com and you can click here on our store, this little shopping cart, continue browsing, and you can see here, products. And I think we have some shirts and clothing in here, but I would just scroll through here and see what kind of products we've got. We used to have t-shirts. Someone's asking, they're saying, I tried to create a VLAN in my switch but couldn't create one. Does that mean it works perfectly only for routing technology? If what you bought is actually a switch, it should allow you to create a VLAN. Possibly the command you were using was not at the right level. You know, part of learning the CCNA is knowing not only the command I need to accomplish my objective, but what mode or level do I need to be in to implement that command. For example, if you were trying to create a VLAN at exec level or privileged exec level, it naturally wouldn't take the command because you're not at the right mode to issue it. Ah, great. Someone else here at INE gave the link for apparel if you want to get some INE t-shirts. So there you go. Thank you, Ismail. So Ismail's mentioning that the CCNA data center does require that the CCNP data center requires a CCNA data center. You're right, I just didn't see that. I was looking through it really quickly. Does Cisco release detailed information on the exam, or is it only for instructors? Even instructors don't know every single question that's going to be on there and the level of depth. Cisco keeps that information very tight to the vest, very closely guarded secrets to them. So even if you're, using Cisco's content, you're a Cisco learning partner, and you're teaching to what they've given you, even you, as a Cisco instructor, don't know every single question that's going to be on there, the level of detail. Only Cisco knows that. All right, let me see if there's any other questions coming in. Thank you, Kamar. I appreciate the kind comments. And Syed. Somebody says that they've done the CCIE routing and switching training. Which course should they go for after that? Well, good job for you, first of all, for getting your CCIE routing and switching. That's awesome. Thumbs up. Certainly you could take the approach of getting another Cisco certification. Personally, I would recommend that you learn Python. Python is a growing language. It's becoming really, really popular. If you don't already know Python, after you're getting your CCIE routing and switching, I would pause on the Cisco certifications and learn how to do Python. I think that would be my preferred recommendation there. Somebody's asking if I have a CCNP or CCIE level kickoff stream like this. No, actually, I don't. So that might be something that'll come up in the future, but I don't presently have anything like that. Cisco ACI, the best way to get started with it, I would recommend going to our stuff. If you log in here, we actually have several videos. And actually, I think a course just came out on ACI. Yeah, we got an ACI boot camp. We've got several. So just log in here and do a search on ACI, and you'll see that we've got several different video series. Brian McGann is the instructor for that. He's an awesome instructor. You guys will love him if you haven't seen any of his videos. He does a vast majority of our CCIE level stuff. And he's got a whole section here on ACI. that you can learn. Somebody else is asking, would I recommend, after getting the CCNA routing and switching, going to the CCNP or staying at the CCNA level and getting some CCNA specializations? I think in today's networks, getting a really good, solid foundation on routing and switching is your baseline. You really want to get your routing and switching down well before you branch off into other specializations. So my personal recommendation, this is just me, is I would say get your CCNA routing and switching and then get your CCNP routing and switching. And with that, you'll know your routing, your switching, and even a good level of security really, really well. And at that point, you'll be well positioned to start branching out into like wireless or security or data center or collaboration. But yeah, the CCNA by itself, while it gives you a good foundational level of routing and switching, I don't think is enough for you. I think you really should get to the CCNP level, get that under your belt, and then think about, where do I want to branch out from here? Do I want to go for my CCIE and stay in the routing and switching, or at this point, do I want to branch off to something else? Someone's saying they have a dilemma between a CCIE or a CCDE. What do you recommend? That's a really good question. The CCIE is really focused on implementing technologies and troubleshooting technologies. The CCDE is more like, how do you know which technology to pick? How do you design a network? How do you know within this network which routing protocol is better than another one? Just off the top of my head, I would say that the CCIE, there's probably more job opportunities for people who know how to go into existing networks and troubleshoot those existing networks and implement technologies into those existing networks. While the CCDE is very valuable, and please, those of you who are watching live, if you have a different opinion than this, feel free to chime in. But just from what I've seen out there, I think the job market is probably better for people who have a CCIE than people who have a CCDE. Usually people get their CCIE first, and then they go the design approach after that. Then they pursue the D, like the DA, the DP, and the DE. That's what I've typically seen people doing. All right, well, we could keep going here for hours and hours and hours, but I think we've answered the majority of the questions, the bulk of the questions. Like I mentioned, if you had a question that you posted today and you didn't get an answer for it, I would highly recommend going to INE's online community, posting your question there, and guaranteed you'll get an answer very, very quickly. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and log off for today. I want to thank all of you for watching, thank all of you for your comments and your feedback, and good luck on your CCNA pursuits. So have a great weekend, and please let me know how you did with your CCNA.